In the mountains of Northern California, rescuers found a ranger tied to a tree, barely clinging to life. But what froze everyone in place wasn't his injuries. It was the massive mountain lion standing guard in front of him. A predator that should have seen him as prey was instead shielding him from the dangers lurking in the dark. No one knew why, not until wolves circled, the poachers returned, and the lion made a choice no one could have imagined. It fought for the man it should have feared. And the truth behind that moment is something you won't be able to look away from. The first thing Liam Hayes felt was the heat. A heavy, suffocating wave of dry summer air pressed down on him, baking the forest floor until it smelled like sap and hot dust. When he tried to breathe, his lungs scraped as if he'd been inhaling sand. It took several seconds before he realized he wasn't lying freely on the ground. His back was pinned upright against something rough and solid. A tree, a massive pine trunk. And then came the sting around his wrists. The ropes bit so deeply into his skin that every small twitch shot pain up his arms like fire jumping a dry canyon. For a brief moment, he wondered if he'd collapsed somewhere on patrol, maybe near one of the wildfire lines he helped survey for community safety programs or eco-travel hazard checks. But the moment he tried to shift even an inch, the truth slammed him awake. His legs wouldn't move. His ankles burned. Both were tied, both locked so tightly he couldn't even flex his feet. A cold wave of clarity pushed through the heat haze. Someone had bound him here deliberately. Someone wanted him found like this, or maybe not found at all. He blinked hard, trying to steady his vision. Above him, needles from the old pine swayed gently in the summer breeze, framing patches of blue sky that seemed too peaceful for what his body felt. Sweat rolled down his temple, stinging a cut he didn't remember getting. When he forced himself to look down, he saw dried blood smeared on the front of his shirt, rust-colored, cracked under the California sun. His ribs throbbed, dull at first, then sharper with every breath. The memories crawled back in broken pieces. The radio call, the discovery of the illegal campsite, the shouts, the blow to the back of his head. Then darkness. He remembered voices. Two men arguing, one muttering something about making sure the ranger doesn't interfere again. A boot slammed into his side. Someone laughed. And then nothing until now. A soft rustle drifted through the underbrush. Not wind, something heavier. The sound traveled low, weaving between the trunks as if whatever made it knew how to move silently. Liam froze. He knew these forests well, knew every call of every jay, every crack made by deer, every dry snap made by raccoons or coyotes. But this sound was different, too controlled to be clumsy, too slow to be harmless. He tested the ropes again. They didn't budge. The fibers felt like nylon or synthetic cord, the same kind poachers used to bind traps or haul gear. His breath hitched. The thought of being left as bait twisted his stomach. He'd reported cases like this before, criminals using rangers to lure predators or to distract law enforcement. He had even filed wildlife protection reports warning about exploitation in rural tourism, consumer scams targeting photographers, and environmental law violations in the region. But he had never imagined becoming part of one. The air vibrated faintly with another sound, a steady thump, like a soft footfall landing on hardened ground. Then another, closer. Liam swallowed hard. Every instinct he had from years of search and rescue training told him that whatever approached wasn't small. A bear? A stray horse from a nearby ranch? No, horses didn't move like that. Bears didn't stay that quiet. The forest went still around him. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. A shadow flickered between two trees. Liam's pulse hammered against his bruised ribs. He braced his back against the trunk, not out of courage, but sheer survival instinct. If something emerged, he had no way to fight, no way to run. All he could do was watch. The shadow shifted again, larger this time, fluid in motion. His breath caught. The golden California light caught the outline just enough for him to see the shape. Low to the ground, long tail, rounded ears. A cougar, a mountain lion, the apex predator of these woods. The cat stepped forward with a slow, deliberate grace, each muscle sliding beneath its tawny coat with predatory precision. Its eyes locked onto him, not wandering, not scanning, but fixed, calculating. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. He had seen mountain lions before from afar, during field inspections and wildlife documentation for outdoor safety campaigns, but never like this, never while completely helpless. The cougar took another step. Its whiskers twitched, its pupils narrowed, so this was how it ended. But then something strange happened. The big cat didn't lower into a pounce, didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it angled its head away from him slightly, ears turning toward the brush behind him. It wasn't focused on Liam at all. It was listening to something else, something deeper in the woods. A soft crunch echoed somewhere to Liam's right, the unmistakable sound of a human boot pressing into dry needles. The mountain lion's muscles tightened, not to attack Liam, but to guard. Its body shifted, placing itself subtly between him and the unseen noise. Liam stared in disbelief. The ropes around his wrists burned. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if the cougar could hear it. Another twig snapped, closer this time. The cougar released a low, rumbling growl, directed entirely away from Liam. A shiver ran up his spine. Whatever was out there, whatever had come back into the forest, the mountain lion wasn't here to hunt him. It was here because something else was hunting too. He didn't know why. He didn't know how. But in that terrifying, silent moment, tied to a tree with no way to defend himself, one realization cut through the panic. The cougar wasn't his biggest danger. And somehow, impossibly, it might even be the only thing standing between him and something far worse. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. The mountain lion stood a few yards away, tail low, head level with its shoulders, its gaze pinned on Liam with the steady calculation of a born hunter. The late afternoon sun filtered through the pines, striping its tawny coat with bands of light and shadow. Every line of its body said predator. Every instinct in Liam's chest screamed prey. He fought the urge to thrash against the ropes. Panic would only excite it. He knew that much from years of working these hills, writing up wildlife reports, even helping with local education programs about living safely near predators. On paper, the advice was always so simple. Stay calm, make yourself look big, back away slowly, call for help. None of that meant a thing when you were tied to a tree, ribs aching and staring into the eyes of 200 pounds of muscle and teeth. The cougar took a slow step forward. Its paws made almost no sound on the dry needles, just a faint crunch that seemed too soft for something that powerful. Its nose lifted, scenting the air, then lowering again as it drew closer. Liam's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He could see details now, the dark outline around its eyes, the faint scars along its shoulder, the way its whiskers trembled with each breath. Then the big cat did something Liam didn't expect. It stopped, not because it was nervous, not because it was unsure. It simply paused, as if reconsidering. The lion's head tilted, its gaze dropping from Liam's face to the ropes cutting into his wrists. For a second, he thought he imagined it. Then the cougar's eyes lifted again, meeting his with an intensity that made his breath hitch. "Easy," Liam whispered, though his voice came out cracked and dry. "Just easy, big guy." The mountain lion's ears twitched, not at his words, but at another sound that slipped through the trees. A faint murmur, a scuff of boots on dirt. Human. The cougar's whole body shifted, not toward Liam but away from him, angling its shoulder just enough that its bulk came to rest directly between the bound man and whatever moved beyond the tree line. Liam's skin prickled. He knew those footsteps, not the exact rhythm, not the individual men, but the type. Heavy, careless, the kind of stride that belonged to people who believed the forest couldn't hurt them. People with guns. People who treated wild places like personal property, the same way some people treated money, mortgages, and even other lives, as tools or obstacles. The cougar's lips peeled back just enough to show a flash of teeth. A low growl rumbled out of its chest, deeper than any threat Liam had ever heard from these animals. It sounded less like hunger and more like a warning. The voices grew clearer. "Told you he wouldn't get far." "Doesn't matter. By tonight, no one's going to care where some ranger went." Liam's throat tightened. The same men. They hadn't left the area. Maybe they'd looped back to make sure he was gone. Maybe they were after something else, a hidden trail, a camera trap, the kind of evidence that could shut down their operation and send them to prison. He thought briefly, irrationally, about how he'd always tried to plan for the future, to keep his retirement savings modest but safe, to pick the right insurance in case anything happened on the job. None of that felt real now. No health plan or personal injury lawyer could help a man left to die in the woods. The cougar's tail flicked once, a sharp little snap of tension. It took another step forward, further blocking Liam from sight. To anyone approaching from that side, it would look like a lion standing over a fallen body, claiming a kill. "Stop there," one of the voices snapped, closer now. "You smell that?" Liam smelled it too. Sweat. Cigarette smoke clinging to fabric. The faint chemical tang of gun oil. He couldn't see them yet, but he could picture the rifles, the cheap tactical vests they loved to wear like costumes, the way they spit the word ranger as if it were an insult. He remembered one of them leaning in close before everything went dark, hissing, "You care more about animals than people. Let's see which side saves you now." The lion let out another growl, this one sharper. The sound rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Somewhere overhead, a crow exploded out of the branches, cawing in alarm as it took flight. Bootsteps stopped. "What the hell? Is that—" "Cougar," the other man muttered. "Big one. Looks like he got to our problem before we had to." Liam felt the words like a blow. They thought he was already dead, or close enough that it didn't matter. Just one more story buried in paperwork, another line in a report about hazardous terrain and tragic accidents. Another excuse to talk on the evening news about outdoor safety and life insurance without ever mentioning the men who caused it. The cougar shifted its weight, muscles rippling. From his angle, Liam could finally see the front right leg clearly. A thick, pale scar wrapped around it, high above the paw, where fur grew uneven over old damage. The scar was deep, almost like a ring burned into the flesh long ago. His breath caught. He knew that pattern. He had seen it once before, years back, on a much smaller animal dragged out of a steel trap. Before he could follow that thought further, a branch snapped somewhere to the left. The voices moved again, circling, testing the air. The cougar stayed rooted in place, hackles up, eyes narrowed toward the sound. "We're not dealing with that," one of the men muttered. "Let the cat finish him. We'll come back when it's done." Their footsteps faded slowly, grumbling under their breath about bad luck and wasted time. The forest swallowed their presence bit by bit until only the buzz of insects and the distant rush of a creek remained. For several long seconds, Liam didn't dare breathe. The mountain lion's growl faded into silence. Its ears turned back toward him. Slowly, cautiously, it looked over its shoulder, checking on him as if to confirm he was still there. They stared at each other, man and beast, bound and free, predator and victim, except the roles no longer felt that simple. The rope still held him tight. The danger still pressed in from all sides. But as the cougar finally lowered itself to the ground in front of him, settling into a seated position like a silent guard posted at his feet, a strange thought crept into Liam's mind. For the first time since he'd woken up tied to that tree, he wasn't completely alone. And somewhere, beneath the pain and fear, a fragile, impossible idea began to stir, an old memory struggling to push its way back into the light. For a while, time dissolved into colors and sound. The pine needles above him, the golden light slanting through the branches, the steady shape of the mountain lion sitting guard. It all blurred together as Liam's head sagged against the bark. Dehydration tugged at his mind, pulling him toward a hazy edge where memory and present tension began to overlap. His gaze drifted back to the animal's front right leg. The scar was clearer now, a pale band circling the limb just above the paw, where the fur grew thinner and uneven. It wasn't the rough slash of a fight or the jagged tear of barbed wire. It was cleaner, crueler, the mark of something manufactured, metal, and unforgiving. A steel trap. Images rose up without warning. Cooler air, wet earth. The smell of rain moving in from the coast. 3 years earlier, he'd walked a similar slope with a GPS unit clipped to his vest, logging trail conditions for a state report on public safety and responsible tourism. Back then, his biggest worry had been whether the budget for trail repairs would get approved, or if some distant financial planner in an office would decide these hills weren't worth the expense. Then he'd heard it, a sound so small he almost stepped past it. A choked, broken cry, somewhere between a hiss and a whimper. Not human, not quite like any bird either. He'd followed it off the main path, pushing through low manzanita branches until he reached a rocky hollow beneath a fallen log. That was where he'd seen the cub. It lay half on its side, half twisted toward the sky, one front leg caught in the jaws of a steel trap anchored to a buried chain. The metal teeth had bitten deep, clamping around bone and tendon. Fur was slick with blood. Each time the cub tried to move, the chain jerked, sending a tremor of agony through its small body. Its ears were pinned flat, its eyes wide with the wild, frantic look of an animal that had decided the world only meant pain. Liam had frozen, just for a heartbeat. Even young, a mountain lion was still a predator. One swipe of its good paw could have shredded his forearm. Every training manual he'd ever read suggested waiting for the wildlife vet team, for backup, for people with more equipment and better health insurance in case something went wrong. But the radio crackled with static that day, the same as now, and the clouds rolling over the ridge promised rain that would wash away tracks and scent. He remembered kneeling in the mud, talking softly, even though he knew the cub didn't understand his words. "Easy?" he'd said back then, the same word he'd whispered a few minutes ago to the grown lion in front of him. "I'm not here to hurt you." The cub had bared its teeth at first, more from fear than aggression. When he'd edged closer, it had tried to drag itself away, the trap holding it in place with a brutal clank. The sound had made his stomach turn. It wasn't the clean risk of a fall or a storm or a normal wilderness accident. It was something uglier, a deliberate choice by someone who saw the forest as a profit center. He'd poured water from his canteen over the wound, washing away dirt and blood as best he could. The cub had trembled, panting shallowly. Its heart pounded so hard he'd felt it through his fingertips when he brushed against its chest. Liam had slipped his multi-tool from his pocket, hands shaking only a little, and worked on the hinge of the trap. It was old, rusted in spots, stiff in others. Every time he pried at the metal, the cub flinched. Every time it whimpered, something in him tightened. "You're okay," he'd murmured, more to steady himself than the animal. "You're going to get out of this, I promise." It had taken forever. His fingers cramped, his shoulders ached, and more than once he'd imagined what some future injury lawyer might say if he ended up in a hospital bed explaining why he'd put his arm that close to a wildcat's teeth. But he kept going. Because the alternative walking away and leaving it there, felt wrong down to his bones. When the trap finally snapped open with a rusty click, the cub jerked its leg free and collapsed, curling around the injured limb. Liam had quickly wrapped it with the cleanest bandage he had, knowing it was a temporary fix at best. Infection, shock, internal damage. Any of those could have claimed the little lion before morning. He'd called it in, of course, radio crackling as he climbed to higher ground for a better signal, pushing every code and protocol he knew. The vet truck had taken over an hour to arrive. For those 60 minutes, he'd stayed with the cub, sometimes standing guard, sometimes just sitting nearby, talking in a low, steady voice about nothing at all, about paperwork, trail markers, even mortgage rates, and how he wasn't sure he'd ever actually retire from this job. The cub had eventually lowered its head to the ground, eyes half-lidded, breath evening out. Not trusting exactly, but no longer fighting him. He remembered the release day just as clearly. The cub, stronger now but still limping, had stepped out of the transport crate into sunlight. The bandages were gone, leaving that pale ring around its leg. It had taken a few tentative steps toward the trees, then stopped, turned, looked back at him with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young creature. That look had followed him into more than one sleepless night. Now, tied to a pine in the same mountain range, he stared at the grown lion in front of him and saw that same scar, that same leg, that same steady gaze studying him from just a few yards away. It couldn't be, he told himself. The odds were too small. Mountain lions roamed wide territories. They died, they moved on. They avoided humans whenever they could. Life didn't work like some neat story you'd hear in a commercial about second chances, or some glossy article on a legal website talking about miraculous survival and new beginnings. And yet, the lion shifted its weight, favoring that old injury with a familiar, almost subtle hitch. Its ears flicked toward him, then back to the woods, as if it had already decided he belonged in its world in some strange, temporary way. A light breeze carried his scent to it. Sweat, blood, dust. The faint traces of the soap he used every morning before heading out on patrol. The lion inhaled, and something in its posture softened. Only a little, but enough that an experienced ranger could see the difference. Liam's throat tightened. "Is it you?" he whispered, the words barely more than breath. "Did you really come back?" The lion didn't answer, of course. It only blinked slowly, then turned its head to scan the trees again, muscles coiling with fresh tension. The danger hadn't passed. Night was coming. There were other predators out here, other risks any safety briefing would never fully capture. But as Liam leaned his head back against the bark, pain radiating through his ribs, one truth settled into him with terrifying, fragile clarity. He had once saved a life out here in these hills. And now, against every reasonable expectation, that same life seemed to be sitting at his feet, ready to decide what would happen next. Evening came fast in the mountains. One moment the light was just beginning to soften, turning the tops of the pines a gentler gold, and the next it was sliding away behind the ridgeline, leaving the forest floor in long blue shadows. The air cooled as the sun dipped, trading dry heat for a chill that slid under Liam's skin and settled in his bones. Sweat dried on his face, leaving salt tight on his lips. The mountain lion rose quietly to its feet. It stood very still, nose lifted, testing currents of air Liam couldn't feel. From where he sat bound to the tree, he could smell only sap, dust, and the faint metallic tang of his own blood. But the lion smelled something else. Its ears tipped forward. Its tail went rigid. A sound answered the posture. Far off at first, then a little closer. A low, hollow howl rolling over the slope, drifting between the trees like a cold breath. Then another, then several at once, overlapping in an eerie chorus. Wolves. Liam's stomach dropped. Wolves weren't common here, but they were no longer strangers to these hills. He'd read reports, sat in community meetings where people worried about pets, kids, even livestock. He'd tried to reassure them, reminding everyone that most wild animals wanted nothing to do with humans. It seemed more than a little ironic now, listening to a pack gather in the dark with his hands tied and a wounded lion for company. The howls shifted pitch, no longer simple calls but a pattern, signals passing between hunters. They were closing in. The cougar moved forward, putting a few more feet between Liam and the tree line. It didn't look back at him. It didn't need to. It knew exactly where he was. Its body angled slightly, weight balanced, ready to spin in any direction. The scarred leg bore weight, but Liam saw the faint wince, the old injury flaring under new strain. The first wolf appeared like a shadow peeling away from the brush. Gray coat mottled with darker streaks, lean flanks, eyes sharp even in the failing light. It paused when it saw the lion, hackles rising, lips curling just enough to show white teeth. A second wolf slipped out to the left. A third emerged farther back, nose low, tracking the scent of blood. They had smelled opportunity. A wounded big cat, a helpless human, an easy meal if they played it right. The mountain lion lowered its head, a deep growl rolling out of its chest. It was alone and outnumbered, but it stood as if this clearing belonged to it, as if nothing on four legs had any right to step closer. Liam's breath came shallow and fast. He couldn't help imagining how this scene would look in a dry incident report, the kind an insurance adjuster or accident attorney might read months later, detached from the reality of it. Ranger encountered predators in the field. Simple words that would never capture the sound of claws on dirt, the smell of fear, the certainty that you might not live to see another sunrise. The nearest wolf crept closer, testing, gauging. Another circled to the right, eyes flicking from lion to man and back again. They moved with the quiet confidence of creatures who knew that patience and numbers usually won. The lion struck first. It lunged with a sudden explosive power that almost startled Liam as much as it did the wolves. One massive paw lashed out, catching the closest wolf in the side of the neck. The impact flipped the animal sideways, sending it tumbling into the brush with a yelp. The others darted back, snapping their jaws, reassessing the distance. The clearing erupted into motion. A second wolf lunged at the lion's flank, jaws closing on fur and skin. The lion twisted, teeth flashing, and clamped down on the attacker's shoulder. The two bodies crashed together, snarls tearing the air. A third wolf seized its moment and darted toward Liam, drawn by the scent of weaker prey. For a heartbeat, Liam saw his own death coming, yellow eyes, open jaws, the end of everything reduced to one quick, brutal strike. Reflex screamed in him. He jerked against the ropes with all the strength he had left, feeling fibers bite deeper into his skin. His legs were pinned, but one foot caught on something half buried in the dirt, a fallen branch, thick and knotted. He kicked, dragging it closer, fighting the wave of dizziness that tried to knock him out. The wolf came closer, teeth bared. Liam hooked the branch with his boot and levered it upward until he could catch it with his bound hands. Pain shot through his shoulders, but he ignored it. As the wolf lunged, he swung the branch down with every ounce of strength fear could lend him. Wood met bone with a solid, sickening crack. The wolf yelped and stumbled sideways, slamming into the ground before scrambling away, dazed. It shook its head, then thought better of trying again. It retreated, tail low, disappearing into the darker shadows at the edges of the fight. For a few wild seconds, Liam dared to hope that maybe, between the lion's strength and his own desperate strike, they might scare the pack off. Then he heard another sound, one that made his blood run colder than any animal call. Voices, human again, closer than before. A flashlight beam cut through the trees for an instant, then swung away. He heard a curse, then another. You see that? Wolves and a cat. This whole place is turning into a circus. Check if he's still there. If the animals didn't finish him, we will. No witnesses, remember? No ranger, no charges, no lawyers asking about missing hikers. Liam's fingers tightened around the branch. There it was again. That cold way some people talked about life, the same tone others used when comparing interest rates or arguing over medical bills with an insurance company. Numbers, not names. Problems to erase, not people to save. A new presence moved at the edge of the clearing. It didn't slink like a wolf or glide like a lion. It lumbered, heavy and solid, snapping a dead log in half with its weight. A black bear, thick-shouldered and broad, stepped into view, nose lifted to sniff the charged air. Its dark eyes flicked from the wolves to the lion to the man tied to the tree. For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. The wolves saw the bear and faltered. Even hungry packs knew better than to start a three-way fight they were unlikely to win. One by one, they retreated, slipping back into the trees with reluctant growls, rage and hunger giving way to survival instinct. The bear huffed once, uninterested in chasing them. Whatever had drawn it here, a mix of blood and noise, didn't seem worth a confrontation. After a long, considering look at the lion, it turned and wandered off, crashing through the underbrush on a path of its own. The sudden absence of snapping jaws and snarls left a strange, ringing quiet. The mountain lion stood trembling, sides heaving. Fresh blood darkened its flank where wolf teeth had broken the skin. It turned its head toward Liam, eyes bright with pain and something else. Resolve, maybe, or the same stubbornness that had once kept a half-grown cub fighting against the metal jaws of a trap. Bootsteps crunched closer. "Careful," one of the men muttered. "If that cat's still here, we keep our distance. Last thing we need is a mauling on top of everything else. Try explaining that to any investigator." The lion didn't run. It didn't hide. Instead, it came straight to Liam. He watched, stunned, as the big cat approached the tree, head low. Its breath warmed his hands for an instant. Then he felt a sharp tug at his wrists. The cougar was biting the rope, not his skin, not the bark, just the twisted cords holding him there. Its teeth sawed back and forth, fibers fraying, tightening, then snapping under the pressure. The top loop gave way. His arms dropped forward, numb and useless at first, blood rushing back into his fingers like fire ants. The lion moved without hesitation to his ankles, jaws working again, shoulders shaking with the effort. Another sharp crack, another release. He slumped forward, catching himself clumsily with newly freed hands. The ground tilted, then steadied. Pain roared through his legs as they remembered their own weight. From beyond the trees, a flashlight beam sliced across the dark again, closer than ever now. "Did you hear that? Over there." The men were almost on top of them. Liam tried to stand and nearly fell. The lion stepped in beside him, pressing its solid body against his side. He leaned into it without thinking, fingers digging into its fur for balance. The lion didn't flinch. It held steady until his legs found enough strength to lock, at least for the moment. Breathing hard, ribs aching, head spinning, Liam leaned on the very animal most people in these mountains feared, and realized that whatever came next, whatever those men or the long night ahead might bring, he wasn't facing it alone. For a few seconds after the ropes fell away, Liam could barely feel his own body. His arms throbbed as blood returned in sharp, tingling waves. His knees wanted to buckle. The only reason he didn't hit the ground was because the mountain lion didn't let him. The big cat held its position, shoulder pressed firmly against his thigh, a solid, living brace in the deepening dark. The voices were getting closer. "Check that clearing," one of the men called. If the wolves didn't finish him, the cat did. Liam forced his legs to cooperate. He didn't have a plan, just a single, fierce instinct. Get away from that tree. Any investigator might later talk about options, about what a reasonable person with good health insurance and a solid retirement plan should have done. None of that mattered here. There was only movement or death. "Come on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure whether he was talking to himself or the lion. He pushed off the trunk, swaying, and took a step. The ground tilted, his vision blurred at the edges. Before he could fall, the cougar shifted, pushing harder against him, guiding his weight. Together, awkward and unsteady, they slipped into the thicker shadows between the pines just as a flashlight beam sliced across the spot where he'd been tied. "Nothing but rope," a voice muttered behind them. "And tracks, big cat tracks," another voice cursed softly. "Great. Now we've got a loose ranger and a pissed-off lion, just what I needed." Liam didn't look back. Each step felt like lifting concrete blocks with his feet. Roots snagged at his boots, dry branches scraped his ankles. The mountain lion stayed glued to his side, matching his stumbling pace, nudging him away from rocks and sudden dips in the ground. Every so often, its flank brushed his bruised ribs, sending a line of pain through his chest that made his breath hitch. The forest thickened as they moved downslope. The last of the sky's color drained away above the treetops, leaving only a faint ribbon of deep blue. Crickets started their nighttime chorus. Somewhere far off, an owl called, low and steady. The normal sounds of the woods at night should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a reminder of how far he was from any road, any ranger station, any emergency room, or personal injury attorney who might try to argue that this wasn't negligence, but something darker. He stumbled over a rock and went to one knee. The lion stopped so abruptly that its shoulder blocked his fall, catching him before he hit the ground completely. Its breath brushed his cheek, hot and fast. Up close, he could hear a rough edge in its breathing too, the hitch of pain from the wounds wolves had left behind. "Sorry," Liam muttered. "I'm trying." He pushed himself up again, fingers digging into its fur. The lion waited until he was steady, then moved forward once more, slow and patient. It didn't hurry, though danger still hung in, the trees behind them. It acted as if it knew his limits better than he did, keeping him just this side of collapse. After a while, and it could have been 10 minutes or an hour, time had lost its shape. The air changed. A new smell slipped between the resin and dust. At first it was faint, like the memory of something. Then it grew stronger, dry, bitter, sharp. Smoke. Liam lifted his head, blinking away sweat. To his left, beyond a stand of young pines, a dull orange glow flickered low along the slope. Not a full wildfire, not yet, but a pocket of flame licking at dead grass and fallen branches. Maybe a lightning strike from a storm days ago, maybe a careless camper. Maybe just the mountains reminding everyone that summer here could turn deadly without warning. The lion stopped, sensing his hesitation. Its ears swiveled toward the glow, then toward the darkness ahead. It didn't seem afraid of the fire exactly, but it respected it, the way it respected cliffs and fast water. "We can't go that way," Liam rasped. "Too close, one gust of wind." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The lion shifted, nudging him gently in the opposite direction, steering him along a narrow line between the faint smoke drifting from the slope and the deeper black of the ravine on the other side. The air grew hazier, scratching his throat as he breathed. He coughed, winced, and kept moving. They crossed a dry creek bed, its stones loose underfoot. Liam slipped, his boots skidding on gravel. Again the lion moved faster than he expected, stepping under his weight, letting him lean heavily across its back until he found his balance. The irony struck him even in that moment. If he ever sat down with some financial advisor selling life insurance or explaining risk management, he would never find a chart that accounted for this. A grown man kept alive in the dark by a wild animal he was supposed to fear. The climb on the far side of the creek was steeper. Every step sent a jolt of pain from his ribs to his skull. His breath turned shallow and ragged. He felt himself drifting, mind slipping sideways into half-dreams. Hospital corridors, fluorescent lights, old memories of his father telling him that working out here meant accepting danger as part of the job. At one point he muttered something about signing another stack of forms, about paperwork and liability, and what some future lawyer might say if he didn't make it back. The lion answered with a soft huff, the closest thing it had to a snort, as if dismissing the thought for both of them. "Right," Liam whispered. "One thing at a time." They pushed on. Eventually, the trees thinned. The ground leveled slightly near the top of a low ridge. Liam paused to catch his breath, leaning heavily on the lion's shoulder. From here, the view opened just enough for him to see a slice of the world beyond the immediate trees. At first he thought he was imagining it, tiny pinpricks of light, far off near the outline of another hill. Not stars. These moved. They bobbed and swept slowly back and forth, gathering, spreading, searching. Flashlights. His heart stumbled, then surged. He blinked, squinting, trying to be sure. The beams cut through the darkness in patterns he knew well, the wide arcs of trained searchers combing a slope carefully. A voice floated faintly on the air, carried by the breeze. "Liam! Liam Hayes! If you can hear us, call out!" For a second he couldn't speak. Relief rose too fast, choking him. The lion felt the change in him before he found his voice. The big cat tensed, muscles tightening under his hands. It saw the lights too, but it didn't understand them the way he did. To the lion, they were simply another intrusion, another threat from the same kind of men who set traps and fired guns. The cougar stepped in front of him again, blocking his view, ears pinned, tail low, ready to face this new danger as it had faced the wolves. "It's okay," Liam wheezed. They're my team." His voice didn't carry far. The searchers kept calling his name, their lights sweeping closer. The lion made a low sound in its chest, not a growl exactly, but a warning all the same. It moved sideways, continuing to stand between him and the approaching beams. Every instinct in it said, "Stay behind me." "Liam, if you're up there, shout." He drew in as deep a breath as his bruised ribs would allow. The first try came out as a dry croak. The second tore at his throat, but it was louder. "Here," he managed, voice breaking. "Up! Here!" The nearest beams jerked in his direction. Shouts rose, clearer now, sharper. "That was him! Over the ridge!" "Move! Move! Watch the footing!" The lion stiffened. It didn't run. It didn't abandon him. It simply braced itself, body angled, as if preparing to meet whatever came out of the dark with teeth and claws if it had to. To it, these lights might as well have belonged to the same men who had beaten Liam and left him for dead. Through the trees below, he saw shapes now. 3, maybe 4 silhouettes climbing toward them, flashlight beams bouncing with each step. He could hear the jingle of gear, the clink of carabiners against belt loops, the harsh breathing of men pushing hard uphill. One of the beams swung up and struck the lion full in the face. For an instant, everything froze. "Jesus!" someone gasped. "Liam, don't move! There's a cougar right on you!" A second beam locked onto them. Liam saw the outline of a shotgun or rifle snap up, aimed high, the dark barrel glinting faintly in the light. The lion's muscles bunched. And in that thin strip of time, with rescue finally within reach and death somehow still just a finger's twitch away, Liam realized the next few seconds would decide more than just whether he lived or died. They would decide what kind of story these men would carry out of the mountains. Forever? One about a wild killer, or one about something no one would believe unless they saw it themselves. The barrel of the rifle rose, catching a strip of moonlight as it leveled at the lion's chest. The beam from the flashlight pinned the animal in a harsh white circle, flattening its features, turning its eyes into twin shards of amber glass. The mountain lion did not flinch. It stood square in front of Liam, body angled, muscles coiled, every instinct prepared to meet violence with violence. "Don't move!" one of the rescuers shouted. "Liam, stay still! We've got it!" Liam knew that voice. Mark from his own unit. They'd spent long nights together mapping trails, talking about mortgages, college loans, even which health insurance plan actually covered the kind of injuries their job risked. He had never heard that much panic in Mark's voice before. The lion shifted slightly, not toward the men, but closer to Liam, brushing his leg with its flank as if to keep him behind its body. To anyone looking uphill with a gun in their hands, it would look like the cat was closing in on him. "Stop!" Liam's voice tore out of him, raw and broken. "Don't shoot!" The rifle jerked, the muzzle dipping a fraction. The men froze for a heartbeat, uncertainty cutting through training. "Liam, it's right on you," another rescuer argued, breathing hard from the climb. "We don't have time for this. It'll turn on you any second. We'll call an ambulance, a good doctor, a personal injury attorney if you want, but we have to get that thing off you first." "It's not attacking me," Liam gasped. Each word scraped his throat. "It's protecting me." There was a silence so deep it felt like the whole ridge had stopped to listen. The wind hushed. The crickets paused. The men stared up at the silhouette of their friend, leaning against the broad shape of a predator he was supposed to fear. The lion looked over its shoulder at Liam just once. In that glance there was no wild panic, no feral rage, only a calm, steady awareness. Then it turned back toward the rescuers, planting its paws more firmly, tail flicking in a slow, controlled arc. Mark took a step forward, lowering his flashlight beam so it wouldn't shine directly into the lion's eyes. He had enough experience to know that bright light could startle a big cat into charge or flight. His other hand, the one holding the rifle, trembled. "Liam," he called softly, "are you telling me that Cougar's been with you this whole time? Guarding you?" Liam nodded, the motion small and unsteady. "It cut the ropes," he said. "Kept the wolves off. Helped me get here." He swallowed, blinking away the blur at the edge of his vision. "I think it's the same one I pulled out of that steel trap 3 years ago." One of the younger rescuers cursed under his breath, not in anger, but in sheer disbelief. Another muttered something about miracles and how no financial advisor's risk chart in the world could have predicted a scenario like this. The lions. Breathing was rough now, each inhale a little hitch in its broad chest. Blood still darkened its side where the wolves had torn into it. The wind carried the scent sharp and metallic down the slope. Any other predator in these woods could have followed that trail, but tonight the only eyes on the lion were human. Slowly, carefully, Mark slung his rifle behind his shoulder. "All right," he said, more to his team than to Liam. "Nobody fires unless it charges. Understood? You shoot that cat, you go through me first." The others hesitated, then nodded. They knew him well enough to trust his judgment, even when it went against everything their nerves screamed. The lion seemed to understand the shift. Its posture eased, not fully, but enough that the hair along its spine smoothed. It took one step sideways, just enough to give the rescuers a clearer view of Liam. Bruised face, blood-streaked shirt, eyes sunken with exhaustion, but alive. "Dear God," one of them whispered, "we thought you were gone." They closed in, slow and measured, like men approaching a cliff edge. One knelt beside Liam, careful not to make any sudden moves. A hand hovered near his shoulder, waiting. "Can I touch you?" he asked quietly, a strange question in any other situation. Here, with 200 pounds of muscle and claws standing inches away, it made sense. "Yeah," Liam breathed. "He's okay." As if to prove it, the lion took a half step back, giving just enough room for the rescuer to slide an arm behind Liam's back. Another man moved to support his other side. They worked quickly, but not roughly, checking his ribs, his pulse, the bruises on his face. Somebody murmured about calling for a helicopter, about medical bills, about how no one was going to argue the necessity of every penny spent after hearing this story. Liam barely heard them. His focus kept drifting back to the lion. The big cat stood a few feet away now, watching everything with that same unnerving intelligence. It was close enough that he could see the rise and fall of its sides, the way one leg trembled slightly from the effort of staying upright. Close enough that he could see the old scar at its paw and the fresher marks along its flank. He pushed gently against the hands, trying to steady him. "Wait," he said. "Just wait a second." "Liam, we need to move," Mark insisted. "You've lost a lot of blood. You've got bruising all over. Once we get you out of here, we'll let some reporter and maybe a lawyer sort out the rest of this story. But right now—" "Just a second," Liam repeated. He pulled away enough to take 2 shaky steps toward the lion. Every instinct in the rescuers tensed. One man's hand twitched toward his rifle again, then stopped when Mark shot him a warning look. The lion didn't back away. It lowered its head slightly as Liam approached, not in submission, but in something gentler. Recognition, perhaps. Or the closest thing a wild predator had to gratitude. When Liam raised his hand, shaking and filthy and bandaged in places where the ropes had bitten deep, the lion closed its eyes. His palm met warm fur, coarse in some places, softer around the face. He felt the solid skull beneath, the strength that could have ended him at any point in the long night. Instead, that strength had stood between him and the darkness again and again. "Thank you," Liam whispered. The words were simple, not dressed up for a camera or a courtroom, just honest. "You saved me, twice." The lion exhaled, a soft rush of air against his wrist, and leaned into his touch for the briefest moment. Between the pines, between fear and disbelief, the rescuers witnessed something they would struggle to describe for the rest of their lives. A grown mountain lion, battered and bleeding, resting its head in the hand of the man it had chosen to keep alive. Then, as gently as it had come, the moment ended. The lion stepped back, breaking contact. It turned its head toward the deeper forest, toward the ridges and ravines and secret paths it knew better than any human. Its tail flicked once. It looked at Liam one last time, eyes reflecting the faint glow of the rescuers' lights. A long, unbroken gaze passed between them, filled with things words never could quite reach. Without a sound, it turned and walked away. The big cat shape faded between the trunks, each step growing softer until only the memory of its presence remained. No roar, no dramatic goodbye, just the quiet dignity of a creature returning to the only home it had ever known. Liam let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Something inside him seemed to loosen, some knot of fear and disbelief, giving way to a deeper, quieter understanding. Kindness, he thought, never really disappeared. Sometimes it returned in ways no insurance policy or retirement plan could ever promise, on 4 silent paws, in the dark when you needed it most. "All right," Mark said softly, resting a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Let's get you home." As they guided him down the ridge toward the waiting trucks and the long road of hospitals, reports, and explanations ahead, Liam glanced back one last time. The forest was just shadows and branches again, the night settling over it like a blanket. He knew the lion was still out there somewhere, scarred and wild and utterly free. And he knew, with the kind of certainty no lawyer or analyst could argue away, that he would never forget the night a mountain lion stepped in and shocked an entire rescue team into silence by choosing against every instinct to stand on the side of mercy.